Okay, a lot of presenting at you. Are you sure? Yeah. So what do you see in this picture? Before you say something, take 1 minute and think about like the first things that come to mind, first words that come to mind. Okay, so we already heard one, deforestation. What else? Fragmentation.
Degradation.
River, degradation.
Livestock.
Livestock. Keep going.
People.
Like land, we don't see, but we can imagine like landscape dynamics and drivers and.
Okay. Roads. Roads. Yes. River. Yes, river we had from what?
Boundaries.
Boundaries. Okay.
Edges.
Edges. Forests. Logging. Okay, now we're getting a little more creative. Okay, how do I do this?
You can either use the mouse or the arrows.
Oh, I think arrows I prefer. Okay, so these are the same, slightly the same pictures, and some of you talked about, nobody actually talked about livelihoods. But, you know, when I look at that, I'm thinking about livelihoods. Thanks, Carol. And, you know, competing land uses. Here we see timber, extraction, agriculture, protected areas, urban areas. So there's competing land uses. We may have thought about economic growth. And then we may have thought about competition or wealth and poverty. We could have thought about families and homes and people's hopes and dreams and their values and what they want from this place. So because we are in TCD, we have a bit of a bias to thinking about deforestation. But maybe if we did this somewhere else, people would have thought about these other aspects. And so when I look at this, I think about, oh my goodness, conflict. Because people want different things from this land. And people have different abilities and capacities to be able to get what they want. And so that's kind of where we're starting as in this kind of taking us back to the beginning. You know, what is the real challenge here? And the challenge is that we all depend on natural resources. All of us, no matter who we are dependent, even though we don't think we are all dependent on natural resources. And these huge disputes that can be very expensive and very violent can emerge because we have different understandings of our rights or our sort of entitlements to different pieces of natural resources. So this happens in mining and extraction, in all of these different complicated topics like endangered species, climate change. There are disputes that are emerging all the time. And when we think about natural resource issues, they're kind of unique. You know, when you think about a conflict between two people, if they have an accident on the road and they crash cars, it's a very bounded little system that they have there. It's like one car driver, another car driver. The reason's probably kind of obvious because one person ran across a stop sign. It's in time and space. It's happening right there. But with natural resource issues, time and space is a real big issue because you have upstream and you have downstream and you have impacts that happen here that are then felt in a faraway island on the other side of the world. And so it's very hard to keep track of who's to blame and who should be paying for the damage. And there are time lags. You know, something can happen in one point in time and only be seen many, many years later. So these are the complexities. There are multiple scales, and our political systems, our jurisdictional systems, they don't really fit with the scales that the problems are that we have to deal with. And of course, the most important thing about natural resource issues is that there are complex sets of stakeholders. Okay, so there's a diversity involved in this kind of situation that have, and all of these people have competing interests. So, kind of, it is a huge challenge. And so, for us, and for a lot of the work that I do, is we think about what is an effective leader. And when we're thinking about governance, we're not just thinking about the rules and the policies. We're thinking about the types of leaders that we want in these positions, whether these people are actually in government, or whether they're just citizens, or whether they're in NGOs. So part of what I've been doing and what I do now is I work with the Natural Resources Leadership Institute, and we build capacity among leaders. And the work that I did with Bob is very much based on what we do in Nerly. I think, how many Nerly? Betty, you were in Nerly? What year are you?
Oh,
15, I think.
like 2012.
Oh, really?
2012 or 13.
Okay. Bob?
I was class 13.
I was class 3.
Wow.
So that was like 2003. Before I started my PhD work, I was in Nerly, and I was a student. And actually, they don't take students, but at the time I was working, it was my TA-ship. Yes. So Nerly is the Natural Resources Leadership Institute, and it's here in Florida, and it's been going for many years. So we are now in our class 18. So we've been going since like 2001, I think. And each year we have about 25 participants from the state of Florida that are professionals in natural resource management. And they do the course. And each year it's an 8-month course, and we go from place to place across the state of Florida to study a conflict or to study a contentious natural resource issue. And the idea is that this group becomes a cohort, and you have a large diversity among the participants. So you have people that work for the federal government, for the Army Corps of Engineers. You have people that work for an NGO, local NGOs. You have people that are from academia. And so what you get is this diversity of perspectives that comes into that course. And
it's on weekends. It's one weekend a month.
yes, it's not a weekend, actually. It's Wednesday to Friday.
Wow.
It's the 3rd week of the month. And so essentially these institutions like the Farm Bureau or the Army Corps are paying for their professionals to come to this course, because it's increasing their capacity to deal with contentious issues. Because all natural resource managers have to deal with contention, and they don't know how to do it. Why? Because they're biologists. Not that all biologists don't know how to do it, but because they're not really trained in dealing with conflict. And so they're like, what the heck? I just want to take care of the spotted owl. Okay? So part of what we do is we create these learning opportunities. And which can lead into networks that emerge from that. And we want to provide practical tools that people can use to apply to their own job. So here are some of the concepts that we teach about. And like Marianne said, not rocket science. And we have this saying that we say, it's common sense, but it's not common practice. You know? So we know that we should listen to each other, but we really do. And we really do it well. So we kind of train people to listen again. And that with the objective of understanding different stakeholder interests. We try to really understand what the roots of conflict are. As Carol said, and as Marianne noted, part of working in participatory development environments and any kind of natural resource management is you realize that there's a lot of conflict, and so you need conflict resolution skills. And so that's kind of where John Dane has come into TCD. And so a lot of what we're doing in Nerly links with that. And what we're really trying to do is create safe spaces for stakeholders to come together and to really make decisions or make solutions or make some kind of pathway themselves instead of being told by somebody else. But how do you do that? Because building trust so that people talk to each other is not as easy as you think it's going to be. And so ultimately, these individuals are trained in how to negotiate better, how to understand. And negotiation for us is not winning. Okay? Negotiation is not just getting what you want. It's maintaining the relationship with the other person and moving to something that might be a surprising compromise, or something that might be a totally unanticipated goal compared to the initial interaction. So we really don't think about, winners and losers. We're trying to really get out of that framework. And part of that is reframing issues so that conflict can be diffused and so that it doesn't become violent. And then there are basic things like running good meetings. Like everyone has to do that, and people do it so badly. And it's so easy to do well. But people just have habits of what they do when they run meetings. And group dynamics, how do you manage a group so that one person doesn't take over the whole show? And really coming back to that philosophy that Carol was talking about, thinking about ourselves as the first step, thinking about our own bias and how we are outsiders everywhere we go. When we go into a new place, we're the outsider. And so how do we take that into account as we're thinking about problems and solutions? So these are some of the skills that we try to teach all. And Bob already showed this chart. So I just wanted to show you that we're kind of working backwards in time. So Carol explained these two courses. And we see this as kind of an evolution because we started up there in 2009 in Alta Floresta. And it was just, Sinomar, you asked that question. It was just a quick 12-day course, you know. But then we did a whole specialization over the course of 2 years from 2010 to 2012, a much more formalized course, 4 modules that Elineji and Thaisa. Both of you were in both courses.
No.
You were just in the first one. Just in the first one, right, okay. And so they were building on each other, but slightly different formats. But always with NGOs, academia, and then people from the local community. And then it started the themes began with collaborative strategies, so all of those skills that I was talking about before, but then also thinking about socio-ecological systems, so bringing in that systems approach. And then we brought in the idea of resilience as we moved forward. And in Kotragasu, we applied the resilience assessment workbook, which was one of the readings, 2 of the readings, right?
One was about the assessment strategy, and the other one was about kind of the concluded lessons learned from the course. And this came from this special issue.
Okay, good.
It was also an unanticipated product.
Yes, if we should list all the unanticipated products. That's really the idea here. And then moving into governance with the RECAM network that Carol was involved. So I'm going to just give you a flavor of the first 2 courses, mostly because the participatory tools reading that you read kind of dovetails with some of this. You know, we want to create space for trust and for dialogue, but like, how do we do that? Yeah, how do we really do that? So this is the field course in Alta Floresta in 2009, and you already saw that picture. And here's a little technique, such a small little thing, but each person, I think Simone dreamed this up, amazing. Each person, because she is kind of amazing like that, each person had a seed. And so they had a little box of 25 of the same seeds. Like, I think I was coffee. I had like a little coffee seed. And everybody had a different seed. And then when you learn something from someone else, or when someone really like touched you, you're like, wow, I never thought of things like that. Then you go and you like give them one of your seeds. You're like, thank you so much for that moment, you know? And at first I was like, what? But then people started to do that. And so then at the end of the course, you have like this collar, this like collar, a little necklace of everybody's seed. And so it's sort of cheesy, but it's actually amazing because it shows just the diversity and how people learn from each other. Like, that's the key of these courses. It's not about us coming from Florida, bringing these skills and this content and teaching people. It's like everybody has the knowledge. It's just creating the space so that they can actually learn from each other. And so that was part of what we discovered in the Synergies. And you've heard about this location where Carol was talking about in Alta Floresta, the Portal da Amazonia. So that's where the first course took place. And, you know, again, the course design, we wanted to understand the issue of, I guess, socio-ecological management from different perspectives, looking at timber, looking at agriculture, and looking at protected area management. And so over 12 days, it was super intense. We went everywhere. I mean, maybe you remember that. It was kind of intense. And I want you guys to say what you remember from that. And we went and learned. And so we use this as our, sorry, it's a little bit blurred, as our teaching pedagogy. Has anybody seen this before, the experiential learning cycle?
Okay. I'm taking John's lesson. The Cove?
Yes, Cove. Yes, I should have a little, sorry, don't have that. Anyway, it's by Kolb, and essentially it's the way that adults learn. Okay? So if we start like we are doing now, just giving a presentation is not very effective. Usually what we want to start is have a concrete experience together. You know, do something practical, get into things. And then think about how it relates to our everyday life. Have like some kind of reflection and be like, okay, so what does that experience have to do with what I know about the world? And then start using some tools. So this abstract conceptualization is like offer a new tool of analysis and then use that experience and this reflection in this tool to come up with a new understanding. And then think about how you can use that in your everyday life and try to experiment and do it over and over and over again. So if you have this, you can do anything, because this is like a little recipe that you can teach and really, I guess, reach people, you know? So there is part of another little tool that we had and that we used was the Férias de Experiências, where we brought in all of our participants in the course and we asked them to share in an evening something about their world, their family, their life. You know, one guy, he's showing pictures of his farm. He's showing some fossils or something. I can't remember what she does, but anyway, something. And then one person was an artist. So on the first or second day, you already have people connecting at a human level, you know, because most of the time we're used to just connecting at an institutional level. Like I work for the University of Florida and blah, blah, blah. We try to do away with all of that. We try to really just find out who are these people that are coming together. And then we get into the field, as I said, we go into the field and hear from stakeholders about the challenges that they face with timber management, with agricultural development, and in protected area management. Those are just some examples of using an immersion technique. And then we really have a lot of listening practice. Okay, so hearing from stakeholders how they see the issues. We would have stakeholder panels for each of these, and the goal not being to try to test the stakeholders or quiz them on their understanding, but really hear how they frame the problems and how is that different from how we frame the problem. And one of the key things that you would not really imagine is the space. It really matters. It matters where you're learning. And so being able to take advantage of that beautiful space that we were in. This is the Ilha Ariosto, and we stayed in some pretty basic surroundings, which were a challenge for some of us because we hadn't really anticipated. I think they had like 2 bathrooms and it was like on an island that had flooded before, and so there was some issues that we had to just kind of come together around, and it really brought the group together. But there wasn't electricity at night. I think we had to read the texts, the readings by torchlight, by flashlight, and everyone was sitting there reading and discussing and getting so into it. And that was actually a key moment for the group. You know, it was a key moment where people came together. And so, you know, it just seems like a little photograph.
Because that wasn't an assigned activity. People that emerged from the group that, okay, it's nighttime now, let's all sit around and read this paper.
We were like, really? Okay. And there's these. And so there were other ways that we try to promote individual reflection. We had learning journals. We really tried to link the concepts to people's own practice. And we had time to really contemplate. And so, you know, it was an incredible first course. And we also had a closing event with the community where we tried to, you know, give them a sense of what we had learned from our field trips and from hearing from the stakeholders. And we did that in a very interactive way. And I think this is very much the TCD methodology of returning results to the field. And so it, you know, that was something that we took through all of the courses. And so then moving on to Côte d'Ivoire, I'm not going to slide through this real fast. This was like, okay, let's go from 12 days to 4 modules, and let's make it a specialization course, and let's make it something that people can get a certificate from. So there was like totally different aspects, and also getting many more local community members involved. And the goal was to, again, increase capacity of conservation and development professionals and apply the systems thinking and resilience workbook, test the workbook. So again, you heard about this region, Côte d'Ivoire. Greg already mentioned it, frontier region, and very contested frontier. So again, we had a diversity of participants, and I show this because it's a key to the success of these networks. You really have to have that heterogeneity to be able to make it work. And then just having diversity and not using techniques and tools to bring people together, you know, it's just the beginning of the recipe. Then you have to have these tools and techniques that can build that trust. And so we again had the analysis rolling through the experiential learning cycle. We divided up the frontier into these different livelihood groups and used the resilience assessment workbook to look at their history. There was a whole process that we used to define the system, to go through the history, understand what the attributes of the system are. And we went through this whole thing. And I will tell you that it was complicated to do this resilience assessment. And there was a lot of conflict within the participants in the class because of the way that people felt about the instrument. You know, there was, in one of the groups, when they did the historical timeline, the people that they were working with didn't want to do it. Because when they talk about the history, they're really talking about the genocide of their people. And so they didn't want to just put dates on a calendar because it was such an insensitive and incredibly absurd way of thinking about time, you know. And so it was really challenging for the group that was working in that community to try to apply this, you know, because then we had to modify the approach. And so it was, you know, being very adaptive during the process, but also trying to stick with the protocol. So we had a lot of going backwards and forwards on that. And again, we had created great products for each of the participants because they did their specialization project. So each person got a certificate out of it, but we also shared it with the community. So here you can see us doing the timeline input rewards with different members of the community. So I'm getting to the end now. Oh, and in this course we had the Juruena River, which, I mean, I guess there's always got to be a river. That's the thing, because otherwise you can't do it. So this was like seriously, this was one of the also key moments. Everybody was in the water. And Bob and me and a couple other people were teaching or doing some sort of debrief activity. It was nice, except that everyone was in the water up to their heads because there were beetles everywhere, like biting everybody. But we had to get bitten, but everyone else was safe. Anyway, that was the process. So I think, you know, this demonstrates kind of an evolution of the approach that we've had. And it's been a great journey for me personally, coming, you know, from Neurally and then seeing some of these tools applied in these courses that Bob's been doing, and then also knowing about Marianne's work with Merge, because I think there's so many themes that are overlapping. Diversity of the participants really matters. Relationships really matter. Building those relationships are key. And outcomes, you know, sometimes they happen immediately, but sometimes they take time. And sometimes you need other spaces, and you don't really put it all together. You know, when we started putting that poster together, even though it looks terrible and I would do it again differently, it was a kind of a aha moment that, wow, all of those things came out of these courses, you know. And so looking for the commonalities is a very powerful activity. The features of all the courses are that they're experiential. We start with practice. They're problem-oriented, and we have an immersion in the field and immersion with actors, hearing from people who are actually experiencing the challenges on the ground. As I said, we really rely on the peer-to-peer learning and exchange, so the network is the key thing in learning. And then just acknowledging that a lot of people working for NGOs don't have time for stopping, because they do. They're doing so many things on the ground. And so they don't have time to stop and reflect and be like, maybe this is not the right activity at the right time. So the courses can act as this space for people to really just stop and reflect, and that's a valuable thing. The other thing that I don't have down here is this kind of anti-isolation effect. Like, I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes you're doing work and you feel passionate about what you're doing, but you feel so lonely because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just doing this work and I don't know if I'm making a difference, and I don't really know if I'm doing it right. And, you know, what am I doing? And then when you get into these courses and you have these practitioners that can share their experiences, it creates this kind of feeling like we're not isolated. You know, we may feel isolated in these little corners of the Brazilian Amazon, but actually we're all working towards this goal, you know? And so that can be very powerful too. And just quickly, because I know I'm running out of time, right? Okay. I guess in terms of the results, I mean, I've talked a lot about these, but the new courses and the workshops that emerged, we didn't expect them to come, but then we were really ready for when they did come. We were able to take that opportunity. And I mean, we did have Bob, who was always out there looking for possible funding sources and possible ways to extend things. And so that makes a difference, I think, having that person who's trying to kind of be the broker for different groups. You know, Carol was talking about how she had to leave. And so that question about, you know, how much does the group need to take that ownership versus having a coordinator role is, you know, and I think when you look at governance, you have to think about that too. You know, how do you build the ownership into the people that are staying there? One of the things that we see adapted and replicated is the Nerly pedagogy and also the content of the courses. You know, it was replicated all the way through to what Carol was doing and Bob and Apui. We found that the resilience assessment, much like we wrote in the paper, it really transformed from being a good analytical tool to being a tool for people to talk, for people to have dialogue, for people to come together and really think about complex issues. So I don't know how many of you have done modeling or work with modelers, but sometimes the modeling culture thinks that if you have a good, accurate model, you can understand the system. But really, the value of that model sometimes is bringing the conversation together. So the value of that tool is to start that interaction. That was our conclusion. And then, well, like I said before, the reason it continued was, of course, because we had a broker and we had someone that was helping it move forward. But we also had people kind of take ownership of it, like the DAMS network. You know, Simone, Elineji, a lot of people just got in there and made it their own because it was in their own interest, you know, with the Family Farming Agriculture Network. Alexandre Olival, who works for IOV, he just pushed that forward, you know. So people make it what they want it to be, and that's great. It's also, you don't have any control, you know, and so that's good too. But I think part of what we learned is that emergent properties of a system are just that. They just happen. You don't get to like, you can maybe like orient sometimes, but really that's not your role. Your role is to catalyze those things and then see where they go. That was our role at least. And so we have these different research networks that are, you know, are out there and they have people involved. And what we really have is this cadre of leaders, kind of this group of people in the Amazon that have the skills. They have the collaboration skills, they know how to bring stakeholders together, and they have each other, and they're not isolated. And so I think that's one of the most powerful outcomes of what we did. And so I'll leave you with an analogy. This is what we do. And what we did, I think, is, you know, you're gonna grow something. The most important thing that you can do when you're gonna grow something is prepare the soil. Because the soil is the way everything starts. And so you have to create the environment, and it has to be multi-livestock. There's got to be a lot of little creatures in there that can work together to create this rich environment. And so part of what we were doing with this course is that. And then, you know, you plant the seed, and then you wait. And you wait until it rains. You know, and so sometimes it doesn't rain immediately. Sometimes you have to wait. And this, I mean, ideally, it doesn't look like that. Ideally, it actually looks like a seed and it's in the ground so that it can be resilient and waiting for the rain. And then you do some tending along the way. But ultimately, what emerges is not, you know, I think for us, and I don't know, Bob, if you would agree, like our role was really in this part here. That's why those pictures are so big, because just creating that environment for people to build the network, for people to come together, and for people to build their capacity was part of what we were looking to